So we have touched 20. Devi ma'am, I think we can just begin and let the others join in. Dr. Priya,
Yeah,
we
sure.
have we have a participation of more than 30, and we expect the others to join within a few minutes. We can just start.
Yeah,
Devi
sure,
ma'am?
Chinju. Let's not waste any further time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so good afternoon, one and all, and welcome to the fifth day of the FDP on gender sensitization and gender equality. And today's overall theme is gender in culture, art, and media. In fact, in yesterday's one of the sessions by Dr. Shalini, we had a discussion on how gender is discussed as a culture based construct. And when we speak about culture, it is usually through various forms of arts like music, dance, movies, painting, sculpture, literature, and even through media that culture gets evolved and developed over a period of time. And in fact, the easiest way to influence the mind of a human being is through art and media. That's the reason why many of the social reformers are related to one form of the art or other. Now, if you look around in the literature, we have the examples of very prolific writers like Mahashweta Devi, Lalitambika Andarjanam, Kamala Suraya, or even Meena Kandaswamy or Jayasri Misra, who have all used literature as a tool to break several gender stereotypes. And I would also like to mention about the importance of movies because I think movie as an art form has had maximum influence on human beings, especially during the last century. We have, I think, in one of the earliest sessions, one of the resource person was mentioning about how in the movie Ranchana, the concept of stalking is glorified. Similarly, we have a lot of other examples like the movie Arjun Reddy, wherein violence against women by the hero is actually glorified. We also have the examples in from our own state, wherein when actress Parvati made a comment about the insensitive treatment of females in the movie Kasaba, she was actually cyberbullied by the so-called fans without actually realizing the true issue she is talking about. At the same time, we also have movies like Pink. So, of course, this art and media, they influence the culture in both positive and negative ways. And of course, we also have to think about the social media as a major influencing factor when it comes to gender. Various forms of social media, again, both positively and negatively, have a huge influence on how gender roles are defined and even how gender roles are broken. So that means we have a lot to discuss upon today. And fortunately, today we are blessed with two very prolific speakers. So for the first session, we have with us Dr. Priya K. Nair. Dr. Priya is a very passionate teacher, writer, and translator. She works as a teacher of English literature at St. Teresa's College, Ernakulam, and presently she is working as a researcher in the Kerala Higher Education Council, research officer in the Kerala Higher Education Council. She has also done the Malayalam to English translation of very famous books by Dr. B. Umadathan, A Forensic Surgeon's Diary, and also the Academy winning work by Sri K.D. Ramakrishnan. So we are all eagerly looking forward to the words of Dr. Priya K. Nair. Over to you, ma'am. The platform is all yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me here to the Study Center in QSAT. To all of you who have gathered here today, thank you so much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk to you. When we speak about gender, the only thing that happens is there are certain preconceived notions regarding gender. And the moment one says that, look, I'm going to speak about gender, we automatically assign a gender to the neutral word gender, and we assume that you're going to talk about feminism, or you're going to talk about the LGBTQ plus issues and all that. But let us not forget that the masculinity is also a gender. There are multiple genders. Genders are like a rainbow, right? And many earlier notions of gender are getting dismantled. And I think, when we approach the idea of gender, when we approach the question of gender, a single-pronged approach will not actually work. It has to be multidimensional. because our understanding of gender is grounded in several realities together. Definitely, the discourse of medicine is very crucial to our understanding of, because medical discourse goes a long way in normalizing and abnormalizing gender related practices. So, and again, the mental, the psychiatric side also, because certain, for example, the word hysteria was commonly thought to be associated with the uterus, and therefore the people with who owned a uterus or possessed a uterus were supposed to display signs of hysteria. So we have a huge trajectory. Am I audible? Could somebody tell me, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Yeah, okay, fine. So the entire trajectory of, again, normalizing certain behavior patterns assigned to certain genders and considering certain other practices as deviant. So you have psychiatry, you have the human anatomy, and then you have the jurisprudence also. Because for a long time, even in India, homosexuality was considered to be a criminal offense. It was much later, very recently, I guess, that it was decriminalized. So our understanding of gender is based upon the human body, our notions of the human body, human mind, the jurisprudence that is in existence in a particular country, and definitely culture, which partakes of all these streams of knowledge, and their art and literature, which inform culture, and in turn is also informed by culture. So an interdisciplinary or a multidisciplinary approach is what is crucial in order to understand gender. And another issue that I often face when I speak about these gender related practices is, the first question they ask almost is, so when you talk about feminism, for example, are men considered to be the enemy? So let me put all that straight before I get into the theme of what I'm trying to talk about today. No, nowhere do gender studies position the man as the enemy, because masculine gender is part of your idea of gender completely. Therefore, there is no excluding any particular gender when you speak about gender studies. What gender studies, being a very progressive ideology, is trying to look at is the exclusive mentality of toxic masculinity, which is very closely related to patriarchy, I would say, engendered by the notion of patriarchy. And patriarchy becomes an overarching term which intervenes in multiple arenas. And gender studies, within genders, within the umbrella term of gender studies, you have studies of masculinities, you have feminism, you have women's studies, you have LGBTQ+, which is an open terminology. We're not closing the gender rainbow at all. It is wide open, because we realize that the notion of gender, far from being fixed, is very, very, very fleeting. And a person in his or her lifetime can opt to change your gender or to behave in a way in which may not suit the social discourses relating to the particular gender to which you are assigned at birth. And I guess, when we speak about gender, we also tend to privilege feminism, because it is within the ambit of women's studies that the idea of gender started to become problematized. And that is why sometimes when you talk about gender, the main term or the overarching term that sort of takes over the discourse is probably feminism. And we have Simone de Beauvoir, who told us that one is not born, rather one becomes a woman. But later, when you look at how Simone de Beauvoir was received through the ages, we realize that this may not always hold true. And when you think about the more recent developments in your idea of the human body, in the DNA makeup and all that, the women like Simone de Beauvoir have been questioned, they have been challenged, and reappropriation has also happened. So today, what I'm going to do is look at popular culture, and through popular culture, try to find out what sort of images have filtered down to us and how far we have accepted it and normalized these things. So that is a great danger with the feudal system, that is patriarchy, because certain value systems which are very arbitrary, which are very artificial, they are normalized and naturalized. And this naturalizing takes place because the reproductive act of a woman, which is intrinsic within her, and therefore many other behavioral patterns are also ascribed to women. And all sexual intercourse is supposed to be towards leading towards reproduction. So this is how patriarchy, again, taking its cue from many religions, builds up its own ideas of how people should behave. And perhaps a lot of this gets filtered down into popular culture also. And yeah, when we think about the queer ideas, and we realize that at a certain point of time, the notion of queer, the dynamics of queer, is also taken into the academic scenario, then what happens is that queer, which challenges all sorts of norms, again becomes part of the academia. So there is a danger there also. So we'll be going into that. But for the time, at present, let me tell you that this is the trajectory. Now, how does academia and popular culture affect your preconceived ideas of gender, which is very, very firmly ingrained within all of us right from the time we start retaining memories. And as soon as your conscious mind develops, your idea about gender related practices also develop very, very clearly. That is probably the first thing that develops. All right, so let us quickly go into yeah, 1 second. I don't have many slides, but if you want to, I can present a couple. Let me see. Let me just begin and then I'll start. Yeah. So we look at the communication technologies and the power of mass media. So this is, very, very closely connected, because as communication has improved, as communication has become swifter and cheaper, the power of mass media has also grown in stature. And mass media, we find that, has shaped our perceptions of social reality. And it has done so by presenting only some aspect of reality and by continuously repeating these messages and images. So I think that is where, the Kerala government recently and the Women Development Center recently put forward a concept of um, giving messages that were women empowering. And if you look at it, these messages are getting repeated. So evidently the power of mass media to project certain messages and to go on repeating these messages have been understood by everybody. And that is why now people who try to empower women and try to sort of not marginalize any particular gender are trying to bring these ideas into the forefront, trying to bring these ideas into the mainstream. So this is the issue. You have a certain value system or one side of the reality which is constantly pushed towards you. And therefore, you grow up thinking that this is the norm. And if you look at the type of books that we have been reading as children, perhaps a child who's exposed to English literature would grow up reading fairy tales and then go into the romances. So what happens is you're projecting images which are very, very passive women. And also, when you go into these romances, they're normalizing heterosexual romances. There is no way that you're ever given an option to talk about same-sex relationships. Because if you look at the n number of romantic novels that are published every year in India, just take the case of India, very few say homoerotic relationships are presented in a romantic manner. Very few of them. And if at all, they are treated as something which is deviant. I remember when Sarah Joseph's daughter, Sangeeta Srinivasan, brought out a novel in Malayalam. It was called Acid. And Acid was a story, right? And in that story, there were two women who were sexually close to each other. And the tagline that came with this book was a lesbian love story. So let us look at this quotient, this type of tagging a book as a lesbian love story. Why do you mark it in this manner? Would you mark Romeo and Juliet or Heer Ranja as a heterosexual love story? You wouldn't, because it is supposed to be the norm. It is supposed to be that which is, which is natural and normal and all that. Therefore, you do not give it a descriptive tag. Whereas a lesbian relationship, the entire novel, you're not looking at any other dimension of the novel. You are giving it a particular tagline, and thereby you're establishing the deviance. You're saying that this is not like other love stories. This is a lesbian love story. So sometimes what we do, thinking that we are serving the purpose, is exactly the opposite. We may not be serving the purpose at all. Yeah. So coming back to the idea of the mass media, the content of the mass media, um, but we understand that the form as well as the content of mass media have been changing over the years. The mass media, we understand that for a long period of time, reinforced gender stereotypes, thereby reinforcing patriarchal culture. And they constructed meanings and images by setting an agenda. And how did they do this? Through selective themes and a selective viewpoint. So, in the Indian context, I think, let me see if I can share my slides now. Just give me 1 minute. I do not know what happened here. I don't know what's happening. I am not able to share my screen. Yes, 1 second. Is it visible?
Yes, it's
Yes,
visible
yes.
now.
Yeah. Okay, fine. So when we look at the Indian context, I guess we have to look at three dimensions. One, the economic reforms. Second, the women's movement. And thirdly, the reach of mass media. So when we look at the problematics of gender within the Indian context, I think these are the three paradigms that we have to closely look at in order to understand the politics of gender production within media. So yeah, one of the first questions raised by the women's movement was the cognitive invisibility of gender. That means, in the early 70s, we found that the gender question was occluded. You find that there's a man and a woman, and they have a heterosexual relationships, and the woman is completely overshadowed by the man. So the question was, where is the woman's identity? How do you flesh out the woman female character? Leave alone the transgender, leave alone lesbians and the homosexuals. The idea was that only men would get projection, only men would get projected in the media. But in the 1980s, the beginnings of the 80s, we find that women's studies were being slowly institutionalized. By institutionalized, I mean that they were being taught in university centers and later, much later, in colleges also. But from the 90s, we find that there is a shift. Gender becomes more visible, but the tenor has shifted, which means the type of projection has become slightly different. The issues raised by the feminist movement do not fade. But what happens is that in the increasingly glossy features and advertisements, you have collective ideas of women's liberation and freedom, and they become reconfigured as essentially individual desires and goals. And when the new opportunities that the growing market offered could gratify, you have instances of a backlash to feminism. But this is by no means a visible presence in the media. So this is what was happening in the late 90s. And the late 90s also becomes important due to another thing, because at that point of time, you have the economic liberalization also coming into India, and the earlier austerity is sort of fading, and people are supposed to be happy when they go shopping, and consumerism is being introduced into the media. And when you find that you find that gratification is very, very important. And the modes of gratification are quite different. And the modes of gratification actually were subscribing to an inherently patriarchal ideology. And it was sell, sell, sell all the way. Whether it was you're selling a product or you were selling desire, women's body becomes co-opted to the project of furthering capitalism. And it is here that we perhaps understand our notion of commodity fetish, the Marxian notion of commodity fetish, because they're very easily abstract notions are commodified. Love is commodified in the form of a diamond ring or a gold necklace. And it is always seen on the hands of a woman. So the woman is the person who wears it. But nowhere does the woman have the power to buy such a commodity. So she depends on the love of a man to wear these things which are supposed to enhance her beauty. So there are a lot of problematics that are coming into play here. One, within the framework of capitalism and consumerism, the woman is the consumer, right? But she doesn't have the money or the wherewithal or the financial independence to sort of buy these things for herself. So she's dependent on the love of a man, particularly a man. And the man shows his love, which means he concretizes this abstract idea called love in a very, very commercial sort of enterprise by buying her this particular commodity. And the women's body, again, quite eroticized, quite what do I say? Like when we talk about food, very appetizing. The woman's body is sort of projected in a very appetizing manner. So that is why I said, the economic reforms and the growth of the media, these are two dimensions which actually come together in the form of projection of gender in mass media. And that is where women's studies also at that point of time, before we found queer theory and all that in the academia, women's studies actually was problematizing these concepts and critiquing, very strongly critiquing the way that women were projected in these in these advertisements or in these particular kind of what do I say, movies and sort of these sort of things. But let's just for a minute digress for a bit and look at these women's magazines for a while. Very clearly, very explicitly, you will find how women are considered by the these so-called women's magazines. That's very, very interesting to look at, because these women's magazines actually, what they do is they have a target audience, all right? And the target, how they have conceived the target audience is very, very in a toxic masculine manner, because they believe that the women they are addressing are all, heterosexual women, and they're all interested in getting married and having children. If you look at any women's magazine that sells a lot of copies, particularly in Kerala, I mean, I'm not sure about other regional magazines, but I think I know what I'm talking about. Like the magazines like Femina, Women's Era, and Savvy. Savvy, again, in a very different manner, tries to satisfy women by sort of appropriating feminism, and going into the post-feminist sort of scenario. But the other conventional sort of women's magazines, we don't have a what Malayalam version of Savvy in Kerala, but the major Malayalam magazines that focus on that sort of target women as their audience, they presume certain things. One is that all these women, the target audience is heterosexual. They're either interested in marriage or they're already married. They want children. They want to celebrate festivals. All religious festivals specific to their religion, they want to celebrate. And they spend most of the time beautifying themselves, beautifying their house, and cooking delicious meals. So these are when you drop a feature matrix of the target audience of these women's magazines, this is what pops up from the feature matrix. All right, and you have these columns of advice.
Priya, sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
The presentation is not visible to us right now. Did you close it?
No, there is. I mean, this is just I'm just talking.
Oh, okay. Fine.
When there is, I mean,
no,
is that okay?
To make sure it was not a technical glitch.
Yeah, it's not a technical issue, because this is something that's not there, and you will be just trying to find what is there. So I just sort of stop it for a moment.
No problem.
I'm just talking about.
Yeah.
All right. Am I communicating properly? I'm getting the point across, right? So fine.
Yeah, definitely. Sure.
Okay, fine. So you have these fashion gurus who sort of take it upon themselves to give advice. The greatest problem is your complexion. If you're dark in complexion, they have hundreds of home remedies to make you fairer. And if you have more body weight than what the fashion gurus have decreed, and they've given gentle advice to correct their looks. If they are working outside the house, then they're told how to be an expert at multitasking. And you have, given role models how they manage their spotless homes along with their demanding jobs. So what is this woman's magazine? It's called a woman's magazine. What is it projecting? It is essentially looking at a woman that patriarchy craves for. And that is why you have, I think it was Judy Williams or somebody who wrote, Why I Want a Wife. Who will not want such a genie? Who will not want somebody who will do everything and still smile at you? So when this is a very explicit way in women's magazines where you're exposing all these beauty myths also, and the colonial, the imperial yoke which still hasn't left us, and decolonization which still hasn't occurred, make us yearn for a skin color which is not our own, and therefore you're urged not to go out into the sun. And if you again look at it, the body, the idea of your physical beauty. If you look at the idea of physical beauty, for a man, it is supposed to be six-pack abs, right? A very, very toned and muscular body. Whereas for a woman, she is asked to go into a size 0. So in a state like Kerala, where I do not think that even in homes where there is a scarcity of food, where there is problem in procuring food, there is much differentiation between feeding a girl child and a boy child. In Kerala, I don't think that is a scenario. But in families that can afford food, you find that women tend to eat less because they are asked to maintain this figure, which is unrealistic. All right, this is unrealistic. So what happens in the end? They end up occupying lesser space. They end up having more illnesses, whereas the man eats a protein-rich food, because the notions of beauty that are forced onto a masculine body, again, that there is also a project of forcing this upon him, but actually it makes him healthier because he exercises, he keeps fit. And then on the other side, you have the size 0, you have this entire brutality of the rape culture going on. And how on earth will a size 0 girl withstand a man who's double her size? Because she's asked not to go out into the sun because of this particular beauty myth. And number 2, she has no health because she's starving herself. So you are cultivating a prey. The cultural scenario, the beauty myths, all these things together, and of course the idea of globalization, the consumer culture, and the commodification of everything. All this is what do I say? Conspiring together in order to create a female body that can become an easy prey to these people who would like to possess a woman in a nutterly sadistic manner. So one second. Again, coming back to these women's magazines, you have these two things which are happening there at the same time. One is appropriating feminism, and the other is token feminism. So, and appropriating feminism is a point where the idea of post-feminism also comes into play. Because, one second. Yeah, within post-feminism, what happens is that there are different ways of looking at post-feminism. Glossy magazines, particularly in the US and the UK, at a certain point of time, announced to the world that, look, the time of feminism is over because women have attained what they wanted to do. Now their biological clocks are ticking away, and they would rather go inside their homes and look after the family. So you are entering a phase which is beyond feminism. Feminism is done and dealt with. We have achieved equality. Now we want to go back inside their homes. And this is exactly what women's magazines also prey on. This idea of post-feminism, which is a very dangerous idea, actually, because the feminism, far from being achieved, has not even started, actually. And sometimes when you look at the happenings all over the world, we find that it has regressed. Therefore, the idea, the notion of post-feminism, which is projected through these glossies, have a very, very dangerous message to convey. And the next point, again, let us very closely look at these women's magazines, a storehouse of information about how the world, the state and society sees women. Look at the advertisements in a women's magazine. Most of the products that are advertised are home utensils or home appliances. mixies and grinders and washing machines. Very rarely do they advertise automobiles. Very rarely do they advertise, what do I say, anything of great, highly priced things. Flats or apartments they might, because women have a say perhaps in the better looking the flat, perhaps this foolish woman will want that particular apartment building. So we find a stray advertisement or two regarding these flats. But otherwise, it's all about beauty products and home appliances. Why? In Kerala, particularly, we talk about women empowerment, which is an achieved status. We say that women go outside and work, but still, the empowerment, I guess, stops there. Educated, yes. Employed, yes. But what happens to the money she makes? These advertisements clearly point to the fact that though the woman earns as much or perhaps more than the partner, the male partner, certain decisions are left to the man because she is not allowed to spend money as she would like to. So satisfy your voyeuristic desires by feasting your eyes on these impossibly hard to maintain bodies by looking at these advertisements, which you may dream about, like buying gold or buying a diamond ring or something, and definitely go in and buy as many home appliances as possible because you want to make your house spotless. Somehow the space of the kitchen becomes a very, very female space, and that becomes an extremely toxic space as well. And this becomes particularly explicit when we look at the COVID situation and during the lockdown. The home is supposed to be a very safe place, but we realize that the maximum a number of cases on gender violence were reported from within the four walls of the house. So we again, we've been seeing this from time immemorial, but again with a shock, perhaps totally misplaced, because we have taken this for granted. We realize that the home is far from a safe place for a woman. Right. And again, if you look at these advertisements for saris and these clothes, you find that more and more magazines are using women who are not Indian, definitely women who are not from South India, Amy Jackson model saris. All right. And you have people from flying in, models flown in from Brazil to showcase saris, which is not their costume at all, something we are supposed to wear. So why wouldn't they show somebody who has the body of a 30-year-old or 40-year-old Indian woman? No, that is not supposed to be projected in view. What is supposed to be projected is the white, fair, the shapely body, taller than Indian standards. And what happens to the psyche of a woman who constantly sees this? And then let us move from magazines, which are sort of an old story. Let us look at blogging. I mean, blogging, I suppose, BLOGGING. The internet has erupted with bloggers. And if you look at the female bloggers, a large percentage of them are still doing exactly the roles that were assigned to them from time immemorial. They are cooking blogs or they are cleaning blogs. There's a woman who I think of Japanese origin who's very famous for coming into your house and setting everything in order. So these roles are, this stereotypical roles are being reinforced in a very new, what do I say, modality, which is blogging. So even there you have, again, look at the Kerala bloggers. You have people, men who are traveling, men who are going out and sampling food, men who are, sort of talking about automobiles, women talking about the kitchen, women talking about cleaning, women talking about bringing up the children. So these stereotypical roles are, I wonder when they are ever going to be sort of busted and sort of taken apart. I do not know whether it will ever happen. So just 1 second. Yeah. I guess that's visible. So feminism and gender, whether redefined, enters the lexicon of public discourse and is deployed widely by the state, civil society, and the market. And in the media, it becomes a preferred choice to anchor its stories and images, to represent both itself and the global nation. And that is why I was talking about appropriating feminism and token feminism. So, what happens in token feminism is that you sort of give a particular character some sort of agency. And in the larger picture, you're still subscribing to the very old brutal stereotypes that marginalize uh, the non-masculine genders. A very good example would be, I do not know whether people from outside Kerala would have heard of this movie, was a movie directed and scripted by a woman. And I would say that it is a perfect example of toxic masculinity. I'm talking about a movie called Bangalore Days. So horribly toxic masculinity was projected in this movie in the name of token feminism, whereby you give agency to one female character and you sort of sell all your patriarchal values to this very unsuspecting teenage audience who completely internalize this warped value system. And that is why I keep telling my students, understand what the idea of gender is before acclaiming such toxic cinema. And in the more recent years, you find that the media and the PR industry have become critical or very crucial for political parties also, for the government and for the social movement. So that's why I said the Kerala government has also launched this particular idea by projecting the positive image of women. And yeah, one second. And that is why, McCann Erickson, I'm just quoting from him, he said, women are human beings first and then consumers. You must know how they think, how they feel, and how they respond in real life situations. So that is a huge problem that we have faced here. And when you look at certain advertisements, this becomes very clear. For example, I think it was the Axe body spray that showed a half-clad woman who's just leaping at a man. So the idea is that whether it is a man who's a buyer, uh, or whether the woman has actually nothing to do with the product, her half-clad woman actually sells the brand. And you're feeding on this sort of voyeurism. And Catherine Hakim wrote a book called The Erotic Capital. So Hakim perhaps was not talking about a particular gender in itself, but what happens is that the erotic capital is of the woman is that which is almost always exploited. So you have borrowing from Pierre Bourdieu, you have different source types of capital. You have cultural capital, you have financial capital, like that. He has given you several divisions of capitals, and here Hakim is coming forward with this notion of an erotic capital. So the erotic capital is very clearly based on your body and how you project your body. And certain people have more of erotic capital and certain people have lesser of it. And this quotient will decide the appeal that you are able to generate by projecting your image on the screen. So yeah, and although Hakim did not actually talk about a particular gender, the female of the gender is the body that is often eroticized, and the erotic capital, far from being realized in a particular manner which is conducive for own good, becomes a project of exploitation. I hope you have understood. Perhaps this can be taken up in the question answer session. Yeah, and this book called Feminism in India cites the example of cultural appropriation, and they actually link it to racism. And you are hiring non-Indian, very fair artists to advertise products for the Indian market. And in this case, Amy Jackson for the Indian bridal wear. This is a regular occurrence, but you understand that it is appropriation and it is also discrimination when the average Indian woman feels alienated. Like I spoke about the beauty myth earlier, you're completely sidelined. You're told that this is not how you're supposed to look. Now, this starts very early, I guess. Like a child who starts reading the fairy tales, and the description of fairy tales are all of these, Scandinavian beauties, very fair skin, very blonde hair, and you grow up listening to nursery rhymes again, privileging the fair skin beauties, and you're given Barbie dolls with their impossible figures. And that is why this is a very interesting book, the titled Feminism in India. And because Indian women perhaps are not able to live up to those standards, you're bringing in non-Indian women from the Western world in order to send the Indian brands, to sell to the Indian market, sell ethnic wear to the Indian market. And that is where you have racism, and you also have appropriation, whereby you are alienating the Indian woman. Yeah, so you have Ogilvy and Mather who have brought out a very comprehensive study of Asian mothers, depending on, and what happens is that, now this is what I would like to explain. Uh, the projection and advertisements are not just very casual. A lot of study has gone into it. Uh, by that I mean, a lot of work, a lot of statistics have been gathered, and that has been condensed and projected in the media. So, when we look at the projection of an Indian mother, there are certain feature matrix that you could draw by looking at a couple of advertisements, and then you understand the basic features of what they're trying to project. So, it was found that deep research was done into how people wanted mothers to look like and wanted mothers to do. And based on this, they were creating an image in the advertising market. So let's just see the major points here. Organized, resourceful homebody, and she can uh, uh, accept help, but she shouldn't be neglecting her duties. Uh, she's a successful one, but not a powerful woman. She is a manager, mediator, maid, not just maid mother, but she's all that. And she's devoted to others, but she's appreciated for it. She snatches a few moments of solitude, and that is supposed to be liberating, and that is supposed to be a privilege for her. And she wants to look and feel good for her own sake and not for others. So these are the projections that have been that have found their way into the media. So these firms have been able to capture the complex flux of ideas which form part of the lived life reality of the so-called middle class Indians. So chauvinism and feminism, if you take up this feature matrix, you will find that some of it would actually subscribe to the notions projected or floated by feminism, but you find that chauvinism was also there. So chauvinism as well as feminism are both deployed, and new ideas of metrosexual and recognition of female sexuality can also be appropriated in order to target new social segments. So that is what I spoke about the axe advertisement also. All right. So like I said, the eroticized body is mostly female, and the products are meant for the female. The gaze is a naturalized male gaze that you find. So there is a disjuncture here. Because if the targeted consumer is a woman, then why is the female body that these commodities portray to the perspective of a desiring male subject? So you once more come to Laura Mulvey's understanding of the male gaze and how the camera and even the script takes on the position of the male, objectifying the woman, treating her as nothing but a sex object. So, this sort of desiring male gaze is what we find in the projections on not just social media, in advertisements, and definitely in cinema also. So that is what I was trying to say, problematizing the type of advertisements that we are exposed to. And perhaps, once we enter college and once we enter the domain of research, we will be able to understand the dynamics of this. But think of a young girl or a young boy who goes into school, and but he too is bombarded with these advertisements. She too is made to look at these projections on the media, and they will try to emulate these things, and get into a sort of mental panic, I would say. And you're normalizing this sort of panic, because this panic is supposed to be natural, and you have to strive and attain these impossible ideas. So the onus, the responsibility of doing many things at the same time is again given to the woman in the house. I am not going into transgender realities or LGBT realities, because unfortunately, this hasn't been projected in the media as much as it ought to have been. Of course, you do have certain advertisements where transgenders figure in a what do I say? I've often found that it is very sort of patronizing in nature. Again, that it is a transgender identity that is foregrounded, not any sort of other identity. Right? You find the transgender who sells tea at a roadside stall. The focus is on her sexual identity. not just as a man, but a doctor or an engineer or somebody, a businessman, or somebody doing physical labor in that sort of way. Because masculinity is taken for granted. Whereas there, the other way, the transgender identity is what is being focused and foregrounded, because we still consider that it is sort of abnormal or deviant sort of existence. And that is the problem with toxic masculinity. And that is where the appropriation takes place. Oh, I have included such characters. I have also spoken about such people in my novel, but how do I speak about them? That is the problem. And again, when we come to literature, and I will not be speaking in depth about literature because that is too vast an area. And what do I say? Literature that comes from the West, of course, you have huge sea change that has happened in the way women and non-masculine genders, I would say, are projected, non-heterosexual desires. There is no heteronormativity or hetero-fascist normativity within many streams of writings that come from the West. But we find that, still there are these inklings of heteronormativity still present within the regional writings. And that is very, very unfortunate. All right. So, and again, there is a huge market there. You have the publisher, you have the academics, the critics who probably would give the tagline, a lesbian love story, thereby doing more harm than good. There you have there is token feminism actually. Because I approve of lesbian feminism. But by saying that it is lesbian love story, you are actually sort of marginalizing it. That sort of imagination hasn't yet seeped into the majority of our readers. And I think somebody's mic is on. Yeah. And this is what Catherine Hakeem's erotic capital. So Hakeem has used this notion to define it as a separate field from Bourdieu's concepts of economic, culture, and social capital, like I said. So I'll just quote from Hakeem. She said, I coined the term erotic capital to refer to a complex but crucial combination of beauty, sex appeal, skills of self-presentation, and social skills, which is a combination of physical and social attractiveness. So Hakim probably meant a body without any emphasis on gender, but it is a female body that is fetishized and made into a commodity that is very clearly devoured by voyeurs. In a techno-capitalist society that has promised gender neutrality, one still finds that the media is flooded with such body stereotypes, underscoring the fact that the body of a woman is a mere object for sexual gratification. So spoken about this. Now let us sort of go into this area, which is very new, which is supposed to be very liberatory, which has promised us that, where people of any gender, people of any sexual orientation will get equal visibility and the patriarchal culture will finally vanish. But has that happened? Far from it, I guess. So video gaming, let's take from a very, very simple beginning, video gaming. And research has found that it is the gender barriers, the gender binary, I would say, is very firmly entrenched within video games. And you have violent video games meant for boys and relationship-oriented games for girls. Not just relationship-oriented, I would say, clothing-oriented, makeup-oriented games, which are meant to be played by girls. And the unfortunate thing is that if a boy dares to play these games, he is going to be mocked at. So the peer pressure is going to force him to play games that he doesn't want to. And that is why I keep repeating that the gender game is not an easy thing for anybody. Neither is it for men, nor is it for women, or any gender that you may wish to mark yourself with. But the problem is that because men, when we look at it, have a far easier time, we sort of project everything against the masculine community. And that is something that we should be aware of, because these sort of, pressure, stereotyping, all that is found within the male community as well. So blogging and social media, they've said that would open up a discursive space for fluid identifications, because identity in internet space or a cyberspace is very fluid. You can take up any identity that you want. You can put up a photograph that is not your own, and you can chat like you are a man, or chat like you are gay, or chat like you're heterosexual. It's up to you. But this technophilia and technologically determinist prophecies failed to take into account the impact of offline social networks on the online interaction. So what they thought was that, the idea of the public domain. I'm sure that if you have read Habermas, this idea of the public domain will be very clear to you. And your the what do I say? Your agency or your subjecthood or the power that you have was actually determined by the access you had towards the public domain. So how much access did you have to the public domain? That would show how much agency you have, how much subjecthood is given to you. And it was found that, many people of the fluid genders, women, they were not getting much access to the public domain, particularly in cultures like India, of course, Kerala. And it was felt, and there was a curfew. For women, definitely there's a curfew. After 6, it's not safe. After 7, it's not safe. Once it's dark, it's not safe. But the cyber world, it was felt, was a very open space. Therefore, it would be gender neutral and it would be empowering. And the heteronormativity would not be practiced in the cyber world. But after maybe 20 to 25 years of using the internet, what we have found is that the offline social networks have a huge impact on the online social interaction. Of course, vice versa also. So this seems like a utopian dream to speak of the cyber world as a very empowering, a very free space, seem to be very, very utopian. So these are certain statistics. This open information space, like Wikipedia, seems to have isolated, even alienated women. I quote, some 78% of Wikipedia contributors are men. And this accounts for the fact that over 80% of the individual biographies on Wikipedia are also about men. So again, these are what do I say, activism that was launched on online activism, which were positive in approach and which sort of achieved some sort of, at least halfway, the goals were achieved. Let's just talk about a couple of these hashtag movements that were launched. I think in 2014, two US-based feminists created the hashtag Feminists Are Ugly on Twitter to satirize the notion that feminists are unattractive and to allow women of color to speak about the cultural privilege and the dominant norms of beauty. This challenged the prevailing body shaming practices online, as well as the perceptions of what is considered beautiful or attractive. So let me just pause here for a minute and talk about this writer, a great favorite of mine, Margaret Atwood. And Atwood is very openly feminist. And in one of her novels, she says that, I went to a feminist conference and I ran away from there because I like to wax my legs and do my eyebrows, but then they wouldn't consider me a feminist if I did those things. So this is a huge dichotomy that is present. When you break away from the rules of patriarchy and you embrace this idea of feminism, is feminism giving you another set of rules? In which case are you free? And when you move into the sort of the idea of queer, do they give you a set of rules? So are rules being generated everywhere? So this is a question that Margaret Atwood raised, which I found very interesting. And when we look at, the way certain feminists work on social media and the way they address their audience on social media, they are more fascist than the normal average patriarchs, I suppose. So you find it is, a double bind, an aporeatic situation. What are you going to do here? And the same thing was happening in the second wave of feminism also, because women of color stood up and said, look, you can't speak for me, Kate Millett. You're speaking of your own reality. That cannot include me because I'm a woman of color. My experiences have been different. All right. So much the same way, we find that even within region-based feminism, everything that a feminist says need not be translated into laws. There is no feminist law in operation here. what feminism on a very broad level is trying to say is that let people have their identity and their agency. Let us not exclude in terms of gender or sexual preferences, as long as you're not forcing yourself on a person who doesn't want you. So consensual sex is what it is all about, right? And desires, the rainbow of desires that have to be accepted as long as it is consensual. So these are the broad ideas of feminism. But when we find this projected on social media, and you have very interesting papers, why I refused feminism. It's because women were trying to tell me exactly what I should do. They were trying to measure the intensity of feminism within me. And this becomes a problem when you try to bring this sort of agenda into creative arts as well. Because then it becomes propagandist in nature. And propaganda definitely serves a particular purpose. But literature or the art, there is an aesthetic quotient, or the aesthetic quotient is what is projected. Of course, there is a community, commitment as well. But then, how can you only project women in a particular manner? How can you only project men in another manner? This is a question. So the idea is the perspective that you take. Where you can take the perspective of Anjali Menon or Anjali Nair, I don't know, who did Bangalore Days, and appropriate feminism, do token feminism, and sell toxic masculinity. You can do that. You can also, there was a recent movie called Home, which was released on the OTT platforms. You can have a character like the mother in Home, who, despite being in pain, despite growing old, runs at the beck and call of her sons. But this is not projected in a positive light. The sons are not heroic creatures at all. And the people who view this feel that, what nasty people you are. So that is the way in which you could actually bring about a cultural paradigm shift in the culture. And I found many feminists on Facebook saying that, oh, how dare this man produce a character like this. That character, I thought, was sufficient proof that the director and the scriptwriter were inclusive thinkers. Because nowhere do they justify this. Nowhere do they justify the treatment of this woman. And if you have watched the movie, you will know what I am trying to say. So yeah, within silence, quickly look at the notions of the hashtag movement before we come into movies. Yeah, and sexual harassment. We all know the Me Too movement, begun by Tarana Burke in 2017. And again, the Me Too movement, we cannot have a very, very positive or, again, a utopian outlook about the Me Too movement, because we have found that it has been misused also. The Me Too movement has been misused, and certain, I do not want to go into the intricacies of it, but sometimes you deliberately misunderstand. And this too becomes part of the Me Too movement. So that which actually had the potential to expose the latent toxic culture of sexualized power in people's everyday encounters also suffered a backlash. So these can be called micro rebellions. And you have, I think, there's one thing which I wanted to mention. Where is that? Now, one is the Lahuka Lagan in 2017, the hashtag against the 12% tax on sanitary napkins, with period tax being scrapped in 2018 as a result of this movement. And of course, the Nirbhaya movement. And this is what I wanted to speak about. Perhaps this may not be as well known as the two other Indian-based movements that I spoke about. So in this ethnographic work, feminist sociologist Shilpa Phadke spoke of the why loitering movement. So loitering, when you look at the word and the gender connotations, we find that it is prevalent more among men, while women are rarely alone in public spaces like parks and benches. Because, you have all these moral lessons coming in the form of rape, the form of murder, telling you, why she was murdered because she was alone, why she was raped because she was wearing clothes at a particular, revealing clothes at night in public space. So you have all these, the justification narrative. So in 2017, this culminated in the hashtag Why Loiter trending on Twitter, with women pasting pictures and stories of how they were reclaiming public spaces, creating the narrative of resisting male domination and patriarchy in the physical and virtual spaces. Now, this is exactly what I was trying to talk about, the access to public domain. So, like we spoke about Habermas and his idea of the public domain, and how the cyberspace was supposed to be a very free and neutral space, but we found that cyber crimes were mostly targeting um, transgenders, gay and lesbian people, and women and children. So we found that this was also not a very safe space for many people. And again, when you move from the and the cyberspace, like I said, was a space where it's very liminal space where the physical world and the virtual world come together. And when you take your computer and move out, or your mobile and move out, you're actually combining these two spaces in a very explicit manner. So Why Loiter is actually a hashtag movement that takes into account both the abilities of the physical public domain and the virtual public domain. And if you notice the irony, she is using the virtual space in order to gain access to the physical space. So we find that instead of going out and standing there and facing problems, you can generate an interest, you can create a community in the virtual world, and this will help you to emerge more confidently into the offline world as well. So yeah, let's skip all this because we are running short of time. When you look at, I'm just reading all the statistics here, female characters in Indian films we find comprise only 24.9% of the total. And when women do appear in films, they are shown in, rarely are they shown in powerful positions. Fewer than 15% of all roles in Indian films depict women as business executives, political figures, or science and technology, engineering and math professionals. Very, very few. You might speak about, Vidya Balan, Shakuntala and all that, but that's just the rare case. When women are represented in Indian films, they are hyper-sexualized, and Indian women are 3 times more likely than men to be portrayed with some nudity. So leaving apart the hulks like Salman Khan, who take off their shirts, more women are likely to be shown in revealing clothes. So, and you have the transgender portrayal as well, which is very, very problematic, because very rarely, like I said, are they shown in a light other than that which focuses on their sexual identity. So it is almost as if they do not have any identity apart from the sexual identity that they are trying to live with. And the last part of my talk, I think, should focus on the OTT platforms. And yeah, with COVID, we found that you have this the only sort of a movie entertainment that we could take recourse to were the OTT platforms. And studies and statistics have emerged regarding the portrayal of women and, like I said, the toxic masculinity being erased from OTT platforms. And I'll just give you a couple of statistics regarding the difference between portrayal of women and the LGBT community on OTT platforms, as apart from the regular sort of the large cinema houses that we were used to. I'll just give you a couple of slides from there. So you have regional OTT platforms, and you have n number of stories like 4 More Shots Please and many others which have seen record viewership. So you have Manish Agarwal, business head of Z5 India, who said that our audience is seeking engaging content. And in the recent past, strong women-centric roles in films have tasted success, both critically as well as commercially. And this has made major headway on OTT platforms. And Vishnu Mohta, who's a co-founder of Whole Choice, says that it is not just the women who prefer watching shows where the lady is the hero of the story. 70% of the users are men and 30% are women. And he says in the series Hello, where 2 women played the lead roles, 85% of our entire subscriber list were tuned to watch. This clearly shows that the audience has come of age and enjoy women-led shows. And you have a research paper by IIT Delhi and the Delhi Technological University that analyzed 4,000 Bollywood films. And they found that women in Bollywood are always associated with a successful man. And very rarely are they portrayed as independent. while males are portrayed to be independently successful. And the report says that the males in Bollywood are generally introduced. The introduction scene will be with along with the profession or job hunting. Job hunting is another genre altogether. A famous singer, an honest police officer, successful scientist. While females are usually introduced using physical appearances, like beautiful or simple-looking girl, and in relation to another male character, either daughter, sister, girlfriend, wife, mother. The OTT research says is rather free of such bias. And the paradigm shift in the content is not just about having a cast that is led by women, but it is also content driven. So not just the presence of women, but the content also, which is quite, inclusive in nature, and women in leading roles as well. So yeah, that is the end of my presentation. I would love to take questions because I think with interaction, more ideas would. Uh, Divya, I agree. The slideshow wasn't in sync because the slides were rather too much, and time wasn't permitting me to go into that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Priya, for such an exhaustive session. I think you have covered almost all aspects that comes under art and media, and you managed to present all those information with a lot of research support. That is really incredible. And I'm sure our audience will be having a lot of questions to pose to you or to share their thoughts.
Yeah, I really hope they would, because that is how conversation emerges regarding gender.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I go first?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Thank you very much for such an interesting conversation. Just a couple of observations and a question. The question is mainly with regard to the women's only colleges. Like you are a faculty of St. Teresa's. I am a product of St. Teresa's. What I felt, like I studied in a mixed school, and then for graduation I joined St. Teresa's, and for PG I joined Maharajas. Unfortunately, I missed my co-ed environment very much while I was in St. Teresa's. What I found was that there is this peer pressure, or inclusiveness is quite limited in a girls' school, I feel. There is a peer pressure to look good, to dress up to date, and all that. So the obsession with your physicality, I found very much in a girls' only environment. While in Maharajas, I didn't need to bother what I'm wearing the next day. I was accepted. If I wore the same dress all 5 days of class, I'll be looked at the same way. But in St. Teresa's, my greatest thought was, oh my God, what am I going to wear tomorrow? I can't repeat this dress. So I found that very disturbing for a girl. And also the kind of dialogue that used to happen in a girls only environment and a mixed environment was quite different in terms of even intellectual. I think the absence of campus politics might be one factor, because I found students discussing what is happening in society more in the co-ed environment than in a girls only environment. But things might have changed now. I don't know.
Can I just respond? And
sure.
then you can come to the next question. I studied all my life in government colleges, which are by very nature co-educational. My degree, my post-graduation, my PhD. And the only time I ever stepped into the girls only or sex segregated institution was when I started working. And of course, I had my own set of misgivings, because for me, the world is not segregated sexually. Therefore, I felt that educational institutions ought to be the same. But in my old age, I have found that, it's much like the ladies' coupe in railway trains. All female spaces, in one sense, can be truly liberating. I agree with you. Women are toxic. Toxic masculinity is found more in women than I have ever found in a man. No man has ever criticized me for my dress, for the way I dress. No man, I'm nearly 50, no man has ever told me that I am dressing badly. But 100 women have told me that. I agree with you completely. But there is a case to be made for a women's college, because when I went to a men's college, and there was a program which was arranged, any program, I would perhaps be given the charge of filling the glasses with water. Everything else would be taken care of by the boys. But here, as a teacher, I would tell the girls, go out, collect money, raise funds, go out, tie a banner, climb up the wall and tie the banner there. Do everything. They had to do it. Right? So I found that these girls, when they went out into the world, they became quite adept at managing things. They were not afraid of the public domain. To be very ironically, coming up from a mixed college, I was scared of doing many things. I was scared of going into a bank because I would tell a boy, and the boy was always there to do things, right? Go and buy that for me. Fine. You want me to get some money? I'll go to the ATM. I'll do it for you. So for me, I was rather dependent. And because you had a huge set of friends who were boys, you dumped most of your work on them. But these girls, they had nobody to dump such work. They would do it themselves. So after a while, I found myself sort of thinking that there is something to be said about female only spaces as well, because perhaps sometimes I do not know the future of all these girls. They might get into terribly claustrophobic marriages and they might live out their lives pretending to be happy. But at least when they were doing their undergraduation or their post-graduation, they had an opportunity to stand up for themselves, tie that banner, go out into the streets and raise funds for the college. That is an experience which we cannot deny. So yeah, while I agree with you on a lot of points, I also invite the audience and everybody who listens to think of this, co-educational institutions which sort of sex segregatory. They do have some advantage in some cases.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. I mean, your observation is very correct. Like there might be spaces where you need that encouragement to go out and perform. Very true about that. Just my experience. I just shared my experience. That's all.
Yeah,
and
my experience too, because
yeah.
I find it terribly claustrophobic, and I find that as a student, I would shy away from a lady teacher who taught me literature, because a lady teacher would look at the book and read. The male teacher, 90% of them, would look outside the class and tell you about the world there. So I shied away from that. I know all these things. It's not that I haven't experienced, but I'm just throwing light on something which may not have been observed. That's all. And I don't like women. I became a feminist not because I hate men, because I don't like toxic women.
And the two observations that I wanted to make was one is with regard to women bloggers. Like you had mentioned that there is stereotyping going on. Like that's also very true. Like when I look at all the Instagrammers and the vloggers, again there is a concentration of women giving out content on beauty products and cooking and all that. But only while I'm a bit confused about the younger generation also doing that, there are women like they have been molded like that, definitely, but like they are capitalizing on their strength, and in that sense it is kind of good. Like what they are good at, they are getting a platform to put it out and generate income, which I find empowering. And the next one is like with regard to the advertising, the multitasking women. What I found is like one of the famous or the most celebrated heroes of the cinemas is Wonder Woman, wherein she is out there saving the world. But Wonder Woman, when translated into everyday life in terms of advertising, it is this woman who has around 100 hands, who is managing the kitchen, looking after the baby, typing out on the laptop and all that. And that is the image that is given out to the women, that you are, if you want to be a Wonder Woman, you have to do all this. So celebrate yourself. When you are able to multitask, you are successful. If you like don't look out for your children and concentrate on your work, then you are a failure. So that is a kind of imagery that is being put out in the quotes of Wonder Woman, which I found extremely disturbing. So
that's exactly my point also. That is what I was trying to say. Why the man eats.
Yeah.
The child is also a contribution of the man, but the man is left free with his laptop.
Yeah.
That is a huge problem. And the bloggers, like I said, of course, they build on their strengths and all that, but I'm just concerned about the content. even in 2021, if the woman's strength is still cooking and making, doing makeup, then where has the content changed?
Yeah.
Where has status quo changed?
Priya ma'am.
No problem in them getting money and getting empowered.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
why is that still the same roles are being enacted? What are the medium is a message, says McLuhan, but here, whatever medium it is, the same message seems to get transacted. That was my issue.
Yeah, I agree on that. Yeah.
Priya
Thank you.
ma'am.
Yes.
Divya here.
Divya. Namada
Yeah.
Divya.
Yeah. One observation.
Yeah.
That is, you talked about how Atwood said that, where feminism in a way is also equally,
giving.
setting rules, right? So nowadays, a trend that you get to see when you about the vloggers that you mentioned, these people try to put it in a way that we are doing what we like. Who are you to come and tell us that this is again a woman's role? Again, you are trying to control us. It is the same, thing that they're trying to put. What is the stand that should be taken?
My stand is, you do whatever you want as long as it's inclusive in nature, right? I'm not critiquing these female bloggers at all. I'm critiquing the social structure that still has created women whose only strengths are cooking, cleaning, looking good, and gardening. That is my only concern. I'll give you an example. When I teach feminism in my class, I used to crack some inane jokes about, the man and the woman relationship, particularly in films. This is one particularly pathetic joke that I used to crack. I used to say, you find Mammootty romancing a 20-year-old girl, you accept that open-heartedly. But would you accept Kaviyur Ponnamma romancing Nivin Pauly? And this would set them off, laugh. Unfortunately, 10 years later, they're still laughing at the same joke.
Yeah.
That is my concern, Divya.
Okay.
They haven't realized that, it is okay for a woman to be older. They haven't realized that, it is not just a man who should be older. They still laugh at that joke. That is what troubles me.
I think we have time for one more question. So if any one of you would like to post the question or to share your observations, please use the platform.
Yes, ma'am, already, to break that, all the questions were asked by the lady teachers.
Please.
No, the thing is, already your presentation is very good, and I think you are covered not completely with women oriented. It's a neutrality. And you are coming from St. Teresa's College. You're a teacher in St. Teresa's College, right?
Yeah, is that a problem?
Yeah. So, no, not a problem, right? I asked the question in the first day itself, but I didn't get a clear answer. Why still in St. Teresa's College, only the lady teachers were appointed?
There are men.
No.
Yeah, they've been men long time.
Long time, but I think that earlier there was only a lady teachers.
No. There are men.
That's true. Yes. Yeah, but I didn't get a clear picture about that. That's why I asked. And you said that, and also what are the examples, etc. you are mentioning. It's actually coming from your experience, right? Everything. That's a good, what I said, this section, it was a very fruitful. And you can see that in the resource, the participants, only very few males are there. And usually what I found is that in a seminar or a workshop in a women related topics, I found only a very few men participating. But as far as myself is concerned, I usually participate in every seminar which is related to women and other things.
That's
why
cool.
Why this happens?
Why this happens, let me tell you. We're very selfish people, right? Now, why do I participate in a gender-related seminar? Because I hope someday that my gender will get vindication. When your gender is already vindicated, and when your gender is already thriving and doing well for itself, and you're not marginalized on the basis of your gender, why would you bother? I'll just give you one example. I think I read it in Dr. Sanal Mohan's article. He said, when you read a biography of an upper caste man, caste is never mentioned.
Never mentioned.
Because caste is not a problem for them.
Yeah.
But you read Dalit historiography, Dalit biography, it becomes a huge projecting issue because their entire lives are grounded in the caste, the brutal caste system. I think that is the reason.
Yeah, it's true. True. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, Priya ma'am, I think with that
Yes.
we have come to the end of a very
Yeah.
fruitful session. I should thank you profusely for taking the time out and giving the session in such a passionate way. I think your passion speaks for itself, like the way you were expressing yourself. That's really remarkable. And I'm sure all the audience have got a lot of points to think upon, to deliberate upon in the upcoming days as well. So thank you so much, ma'am, for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Great.
Thank you so much.